you closed your eyes, and the thought that arrived was not welcome. Not a fear, exactly. More like a certainty you haven't been able to set down. That the world is a certain way. That you are a certain way. And that both of those things are, somehow, not quite right. Researchers have been finding the same pattern for decades. The beliefs people carry about themselves and about the future don't wait for a quiet moment. They become loudest precisely when everything else goes still. Why is what you believe about life the biggest barrier keeping you from sleep? The answer isn't what most people expect. Welcome to Sleepy Science. What begins tonight is not a lecture on thinking differently. It is something quieter, an unfolding of what your mind has been doing all along, and why sleep was never the problem. Close your eyes now. Your breath already knows the way. Notice how stillness is already here. Between every thought, in every pause, it has always been waiting. And now we begin. The relationship between what you believe and whether you sleep is not a metaphor. It is a chain of chemistry. When the brain holds an unresolved belief about safety, worth, or the future, it flags that open question the way a security system flags an unlocked door. Something to watch, something to monitor, something that cannot simply be left alone. The alarm bell in the brain, a cluster of cells called the locus coeruleus, releases norepinephrine, the chemical of alertness. The prefrontal cortex stays powered on, assessing sleep, which requires that entire monitoring system to step back, becomes genuinely difficult to reach. The mind is not being difficult. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Keeping watch over what matters. Tonight begins with that understanding. Core beliefs, in cognitive science, are a distinct category from ordinary thoughts. They are not conclusions the mind arrives at. They are the lenses through which conclusions are formed. A model developed by Aaron Beck in the 1970s and refined by decades of clinical work since identifies 3 clusters that most consistently disrupt sleep. Beliefs about self-adequacy, beliefs about relational safety, and beliefs about world predictability. What makes these different from surface-level worries is their invisibility. They don't announce themselves. They simply shape the emotional coloring of everything else. And at night, with the distractions stripped away, that coloring becomes the whole room. The default mode network, the brain's resting state circuit, is where core beliefs live when nothing else is demanding attention. Brain imaging studies have shown that this network activates most strongly during quiet wakefulness, during mind wandering, and during the period of lying still before sleep. It handles self-referential thought. Who you are, what others think of you, what might happen next. For people carrying unresolved beliefs about these things, that activation at bedtime is not neutral. It is an automatic return to the most emotionally charged material. The mind has been stepping around all day. The night is not where worries intrude. For many people, The night is where the mind finally gets a chance to sit with what it couldn't during the day. Hyperarousal, the physiological state most consistently linked to chronic sleep difficulty, is not primarily caused by caffeine or screen light, though those contribute. Researchers studying insomnia have found it is driven by cognitive hyperactivation. A mind carrying unresolved material keeps monitoring its own state, even while trying to sleep. People with insomnia don't just have worried thoughts. They have worried thoughts about having worried thoughts. That second layer is itself a belief-driven event. And that second-order alarm activates the same arousal system as the original concern. The loop is real. It is documented. And it runs on internal frameworks, on what a person believes sleep is supposed to look like, more than on anything happening in the room. Falling asleep requires a form of cognitive surrender that is genuinely incompatible with belief-based vigilance. Sleep researchers call this cognitive deactivation, the gradual withdrawal of attentional resources from monitoring, planning, and self-evaluation. Sleep lab recordings show that successful sleep onset is marked by a predictable drop in high-frequency brain activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region most associated with self-monitoring and belief evaluation. For individuals whose core beliefs are organized around threat detection, this deactivation is not simply difficult. It is experienced as subtly dangerous. The belief that staying alert is staying safe means that surrendering to sleep feels, at some level, like a risk. The body knows this. The resistance is not laziness. It is loyalty. Schema theory describes core beliefs as deep cognitive structures that organize all incoming information, the framework through which every new experience is interpreted before conscious evaluation begins. A model widely used in therapy identifies a set of early maladaptive schemas that most consistently interfere with relaxation. The most sleep-relevant include schemas around abandonment, failure, unrelenting standards, and vulnerability to harm. What these share is a temporal pull. They orient the mind toward what might go wrong next, or what has already been proven true about oneself. They tug consciousness toward past evidence and future predictions simultaneously, exactly the two directions most incompatible with the present moment softness that sleep requires. To rest here, now, is to move against a schema that insists the story isn't finished. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBT-I, is the first line. Evidence-based treatment for chronic insomnia, recommended ahead of sleep medication by major medical organizations worldwide. Its efficacy is not primarily due to sleep hygiene or stimulus control, though these are components. It works through belief restructuring, the systematic examination and revision of the thought patterns that maintain hyperarousal. Studies consistently show that the component with the largest treatment effect is cognitive restructuring, directly targeting the beliefs about sleep, self, and safety that keep the nervous system online. The most powerful sleep medicine, the evidence suggests, is not a pill. It is changing what you think is true. That finding is more radical than it sounds. The brain's threat detection system, centered in the amygdala, does not distinguish between physical danger and an unresolved psychological belief. Brain imaging studies show that unresolved cognitive content activates threat circuitry in ways measurably similar to perceived physical threat. The degree of activation correlates not with the content of the belief, but with its certainty. A belief held with high conviction, even a distressing one, generates less arousal than a belief held in uncertainty. The mind is more distressed by not knowing than by knowing something difficult. This is why catastrophic but certain beliefs sometimes allow more sleep than ambiguous ones. At least the amygdala has something to evaluate and file. Ambiguity keeps the system running. Rumination, the repetitive, passive return to distressing content, is cognitively distinct from worry, and that distinction matters for sleep. Worry is future-oriented. It rehearses what might go wrong. Rumination is past-oriented. It revisits what has already gone wrong, turning the same evidence over and over. Both disrupt sleep, but differently. Worry prevents sleep onset by maintaining anticipatory arousal. Rumination disrupts sleep maintenance by reactivating emotional content during the lighter stages of the night. People who score high on both patterns show significantly worse sleep architecture than those with only one, suggesting that the combination, not either alone, is what most powerfully disturbs the night. The two together keep watch across the full arc of darkness. Sleep researchers identify a class called sleep-specific dysfunctional beliefs, distinct from general anxiety. These are beliefs specifically about sleep itself. The dysfunctional beliefs and attitudes about sleep scale, developed by Charles Morin at Laval University, measures these beliefs and has been validated across dozens of countries. Scores on this scale correlate more strongly with insomnia severity than objective sleep measurements do, meaning what a person believes about their sleep shapes their experience of it more powerfully than what their sleep actually looks like. The story about sleep is part of the sleep itself. Perfectionism. At its core, a belief that adequacy is conditional on performance, creates a neurological state incompatible with rest. The perfectionist brain does not distinguish between performance tasks and the task of sleeping. Sleep becomes another thing to do correctly. Monitor carefully, and feel inadequate about when it doesn't proceed as expected. Sleep researchers have documented that perfectionism predicts both sleep onset latency and sleep-related worry, even when controlling for general anxiety. The belief, "I must do this well," extends automatically to "I must sleep well," and the monitoring required to assess whether sleeping is going well is precisely what prevents sleep from proceeding. The watcher and the watched become the same exhausted person. Attachment theory, developed to describe the bond between infants and caregivers, has a direct and measurable extension into adult sleep. Research on adult attachment styles shows that people with anxious attachment, characterized by beliefs about relational insecurity and fear of abandonment, have significantly higher rates of sleep maintenance difficulties than those with secure attachment. The body responds through the social threat monitoring system, which remains subtly activated during the night. For these individuals, sleep is complicated not by what is happening, but by a deep background belief that safety is provisional and connection is fragile, a belief the nervous system acts on even in the dark, even when no one is there to confirm or deny it. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of belief evaluation, self-monitoring, and deliberate cognitive control, is precisely the brain region that must power down for sleep to occur. Brain scientists call this prefrontal downregulation during sleep onset, and brain recordings confirm it progresses in measurable stages. The irony embedded in this neuroanatomy is significant. The very tool you use to evaluate whether you're safe enough to sleep is the tool that has to stop working for sleep to happen. People with high conviction negative core beliefs are particularly vulnerable to this paradox. The more actively they monitor for safety, which their beliefs require, the more they keep that region online, which delays sleep. Rest doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes when the thinking is allowed to soften. Sleep deprivation produces a measurable shift in core belief strength. Research published in cognitive neuroscience journals shows that after just one night of restricted sleep, negative core beliefs become more accessible. They require less effort to activate and less evidence to feel compelling. The mechanism involves reduced prefrontal modulation of the amygdala. A tired prefrontal cortex is less able to contextualize or soften the emotional weight of belief content. This creates a feedback loop researchers call the insomnia maintenance cycle. Poor sleep strengthens negative beliefs, which increase hyperarousal, which produces further poor sleep. The loop is self-sustaining and evidence-resistant, meaning people who are most sleep-deprived are least equipped to question the beliefs keeping them awake. Not all core beliefs disrupt sleep equally. Research has found that beliefs about uncontrollability, I cannot change what is happening to me, are more disruptive to sleep than beliefs about danger. The neurological basis appears to involve learned helplessness circuits. When the brain concludes that effort is irrelevant to outcome, it enters a state of passive arousal, not the action mobilizing alertness of acute threat, but a quieter, more persistent activation that may be even more resistant to sleep onset than acute fear. The feeling is sometimes described as a kind of numb wakefulness, present, but going nowhere. The body can't mobilize and can't rest. It simply waits, unsure what it's waiting for. The relationship between self-critical beliefs about the body and sleep quality has been documented in clinical sleep research. People with high body-related self-criticism show elevated pre-sleep cortisol and reduced slow-wave sleep, the phase most associated with physical recovery. What drives this is not the content of the belief specifically, but its unresolved quality. The ongoing audit. A mind that believes the body is inadequate maintains a low-level monitoring state, checking for evidence, finding it, checking again. The same surveillance architecture that wakes the threat system for external danger runs on internal self-judgment as fuel. A critical mind doesn't settle in the same way that a mind at peace with itself does. The audit doesn't file itself away. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for insomnia, MBCT, targets a different level of belief than CBTI does. Where CBTI works to change the content of dysfunctional beliefs, MBCTI works to change the relationship to belief itself. The core intervention is metacognitive decentering. Learning to observe beliefs as mental events rather than accurate reports about reality. Clinical trials from sleep research centers have found that MBCTI achieves comparable outcomes to CBTI in sleep efficiency, but through a different route, not by arguing with the beliefs, but by making them less sticky. Thoughts about unworthiness don't need to be refuted to lose their power. They need to be seen as thoughts, which is a different thing from being seen as truths. Perceived psychological safety, the felt sense of being in an environment where one's standing and acceptance are not under threat, shows strong correlation with sleep quality across multiple studies. When safety is present, cortisol reactivity decreases, baseline sympathetic tone lowers, and heart rate variability rises, all conditions that support the parasympathetic dominance that sleep requires. Conversely, environments or relationships that generate chronic uncertainty about one's value or acceptability maintain a low background belief. That belief doesn't switch off at bedtime. The nervous system carries it home, carries it into the dark, and continues running the low-level scan. It was running all day. Sleep researchers have identified a phenomenon called pre-sleep cognitive arousal, distinct from general anxiety, that is specifically driven by belief activation. A validated measure captures two components: somatic arousal, which is physical restlessness, and cognitive arousal, which is unwanted intrusive thought. Studies consistently show that cognitive arousal predicts sleep difficulty more strongly than somatic arousal. The thoughts are more disruptive than the physical restlessness. And within cognitive arousal, the content most commonly reported is not fear about the next day, but unresolved beliefs about the self. Questions of adequacy, worth, whether one is living correctly. The body can be completely still and the mind can still be loud, asking a question it cannot answer in the dark. Research on acceptance-based approaches to sleep demonstrates that psychological flexibility, the ability to hold beliefs and uncertainties without fusing with them or needing to resolve them, is associated with significantly better sleep outcomes than cognitive suppression strategies. Trying to push negative core beliefs away before sleep is not only ineffective, it is counterproductive. A well-documented finding in cognitive science shows that the deliberate attempt to suppress a thought reliably increases its frequency. The effort to not think about something guarantees that the something stays active. The paradox of sleep is that rest requires permission, and permission requires the willingness to let the beliefs simply be there, without the added weight of fighting them. Shame, a belief about the fundamental inadequacy of the self. as distinct from guilt, which concerns a specific behavior, has a particularly strong relationship with sleep disruption. Research on shame and self-conscious emotions documents that chronic shame is associated with hypervigilance, social monitoring, and a persistent internal orientation towards self-evaluation. The brain carrying shame is a brain engaged in continuous internal audit, comparing the self to a standard, finding it lacking, and rerunning the evidence. That audit does not pause at bedtime. It often intensifies, because the distractions that made the discrepancy tolerable during the day have been removed. In the quiet, the gap between who one is and who one believes one should be becomes audible. The relationship between self-compassion and sleep quality has been studied directly and yields consistent results. Research by Kristin Neff at the University of Texas at Austin, whose work defined self-compassion for psychological science, has examined whether the belief I deserve kindness when I am struggling influences sleep outcomes. The data shows it does. High self-compassion scores are associated with lower pre-sleep cognitive arousal, shorter sleep onset latency, and fewer nocturnal awakenings. When the body receives the signal that this particular person is not in danger of being harmed by their own failures, when that judgment is genuinely suspended, the threat detection system can reduce its watch. The signal quiets the guard. Not through argument, through a different kind of permission. Narrative identity theory, the idea that humans organize their sense of self around a continuous story, predicts sleep disruption when that story is fragmented or unresolved. Research on life narratives shows that people whose stories contain high levels of contamination sequences, where good things consistently turn bad, show significantly more nighttime rumination than those whose stories contain redemption sequences, where difficulty eventually leads to meaning. What matters for sleep is not whether the story contains hardship, but whether it has a direction. A narrative that is going somewhere can rest at a resting place. A narrative that is circling, re-examining the same evidence, reaching no verdict, carries the circling into the night. The interoceptive system. Think of it as the body's internal radar, the network that monitors heartbeat, breathing, temperature, and muscular tension, is hyperactivated in people with negative core beliefs about themselves. Research from Hugo Critchley's lab at the University of Sussex documents that heightened body awareness is significantly higher in individuals with shame-based and inadequacy-based core beliefs. At bedtime, this hyper-awareness translates directly into difficulty settling. The very process of relaxation, the slowing of heart rate, the deepening of breath, is monitored and evaluated rather than allowed to happen on its own. A body under surveillance relaxes more slowly than a body left to its own intelligence. The watching interferes with the watched. The pattern across these first 25 facts reveals something the science has been converging on for decades. The question, "Why can't I sleep?" is almost always answered not by what is happening in the night, but by what the mind has already decided about itself before the night begins. Core beliefs about safety, worth, and certainty don't wait for silence. They use it. Every arousal system, every monitoring pathway, every stress response traced so far leads back to one thing: an open question about whether this particular self, in this particular life, is going to be all right. The second arc of tonight follows not the question itself, but what begins to happen when the mind is no longer required to answer it. That is where this journey continues. You're still here with us, and that means everything. A gentle subscribe helps another sleepless mind find their way home. Let's take a breath together now, one sleepy soul at a time. Right now, the part of your brain that evaluates whether you are adequate is beginning to lose its signal. Not because you've decided anything, not because the question has been answered, but because the body has begun its own work, lowering the chemistry of vigilance, degree by degree. Without asking your permission, the question that was just left open: what happens when the mind stops needing to answer, lives not in any belief you hold. It lives in what your nervous system already knows how to do. If the monitoring is allowed to soften, notice your breathing now. It is already moving towards something you didn't instruct it to find. Now, we continue. Falling asleep is not a single event. It is a gradual, region by region surrender across the brain. Brain researchers using high-density recording have documented what they call local sleep intrusions. Brief moments during light drowsiness when small regions of the cortex enter a sleep-like state before the whole brain follows. These intrusions are more frequent in regions that have been most active during waking hours. For people who spend the time before bed in belief evaluation, social monitoring, and self-assessment, the prefrontal regions hold out longest. They have been working hardest. The biology of drifting off, it turns out, is the brain releasing itself piece by piece, each region letting go in the order it was last needed. The last to let go is always the part that was most in use. Imagining future events activates the same neural circuits as actually experiencing them, generating physiological responses that are real even though the event exists only in the mind. Research by Carl Spooner and colleagues has shown that people with a more threatening outlook generate more vivid and more emotionally charged future scenarios, and that those scenarios are harder to dismiss. Heart rate shifts. Cortisol moves. The body lying in bed is sometimes already living in a future it hasn't reached yet, running the simulation with full biological investment. A mind that believes the future is threatening is not idle. It is rehearsing. The body keeps arriving at the place the mind keeps sending it. The more deliberately a person tries to force sleep to happen, the less likely sleep is to occur. This finding, replicated across multiple laboratories, arises from the belief that sleep must be performed correctly. Sleep effort is measurable. Scales exist that capture it, and high effort consistently predicts longer time to fall asleep, more awakenings, and lower satisfaction with sleep. The mechanism is the familiar paradox. Trying to make sleep happen activates the monitoring systems that prevent it. The research points not toward passivity, but toward a specific kind of permission, the genuine belief, held without performance, that tonight's outcome does not depend on effort. That belief, when truly held, is itself a sleep intervention. Social comparison beliefs, the conviction that your situation is measurably worse than others, activate distinct neural pathways from ordinary self-critical thought. Unfavorable social comparison generates something neurologically equivalent to loss, a signal from the reward system registering deficit. At night, this circuitry becomes accessible through the brain's self-referential resting state. People lying awake running comparisons. Who has more stability, more certainty, more peace, are not engaging in voluntary rumination. They are following a deep cognitive habit whose roots lie in social threat detection, an ancient system that grades position within the group and acts on the result. The system was designed for survival. In a quiet room, it finds nowhere to direct its findings. Sleep maintenance insomnia, waking during the night and struggling to return to sleep, involves a specific belief about those awakenings. Research from Colin Espy's group at Oxford identifies the key element as catastrophization of waking. The automatic belief that being awake in the night signals failure, danger, or permanent deterioration. What is notable is that all sleepers wake briefly during the night. Studies consistently show this happens many times per sleep cycle. In everyone. Most people return to sleep without memory of waking, because no belief is activated. The difference is the evaluation. I'm awake. This is wrong. This is getting worse. The belief, not the waking itself, is what extends the episode into something suffered. A significant proportion of people who report sleeping poorly show normal or near normal sleep when measured objectively. This is not a contradiction. It is a documented phenomenon driven by hyperarousal. When the brain is insufficiently deactivated, light sleep states feel like wakefulness because the monitoring system never fully stepped back. The experience of lying awake suffering is genuine. But the mechanism is not the absence of sleep. It is the presence of a belief-activated watch that prevents the brain from losing awareness of itself. The belief, I never sleep, can be genuinely experienced while sleep is occurring. The watch and the sleeper are the same person, and the watch never fully stopped. A brain region called the anterior cingulate cortex functions as an alarm for mismatch. It signals when reality doesn't match expectation. Brain imaging has documented heightened activity in this region in people with insomnia during the transition to sleep. For people whose core beliefs set high expectations for safety, certainty, and performance, the mismatch alarm finds something to flag everywhere. The night is not how it should be. The self is not how it should be. The future is not how it should be. This constant discrepancy signal is one of the most persistent contributors to the hyperarousal that delays sleep. The alarm was built for genuine danger. In the quiet of the bedroom, It has only the gap between what is and what was believed. It is not the presence of negative thoughts or difficult beliefs that most reliably predicts sleep difficulty. It is the reaction to them. Research within acceptance-based frameworks consistently shows that experiential avoidance, the effort to suppress, escape from, or not have certain internal experiences, predicts insomnia severity more reliably than the content of the experiences themselves. The secondary alarm at having the thoughts, the belief that having them means something is wrong with the night or with the self. That layer is more disruptive than the original thought. The difficulty is not that you believe difficult things. It is that you believe you shouldn't. The permission to let them be present, without adding the meta layer of rejection, is itself a measurable reduction in arousal. Chronic stress is defined not as an acute stressor, but as the sustained cognitive appraisal that ongoing demands exceed one's resources. Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller University developed the concept of allostatic load to describe the accumulated physiological cost of that sustained appraisal. Blunted cortisol patterns, dysregulated sleep timing, compressed slow-wave sleep. The key word in the model is appraisal. The physiological burden is driven not by what is objectively happening, but by the sustained belief that it is too much and will not resolve. It is, at its core, a belief problem expressed in biology. The body is running on a conclusion the mind reached, and the body has no way to update the conclusion on its own. Sleep and belief change are more directly connected than most people realize. Research from Harvard Sleep Science shows that the hippocampus consolidates memories during slow-wave sleep, and that emotional memories are specifically processed during REM sleep, with their emotional charge gradually reduced through repeated reactivation in a low norepinephrine environment. This means sleep is not only impaired by negative beliefs, it is also the mechanism through which those beliefs could soften. If sleep were allowed to proceed, the insomnia maintenance cycle carries a quiet, internal cruelty. The beliefs that prevent sleep are precisely the material that sleep would work on if allowed to. Rest is both the casualty of the problem and its most available solution. Research on the neuroplasticity of core beliefs in adults has overturned the assumption that such structures were largely fixed after early development. Brain imaging studies conducted before and after CBT-I treatment show measurable changes in prefrontal amygdala connectivity, reduced activation in threat processing regions, and increased activation in regulatory circuits, all corresponding to shifts in the dysfunctional beliefs targeted by treatment. The beliefs keeping you awake tonight are not permanent features of who you are. They are patterns, heavily practiced, deeply reinforced, but neurologically revisable. The brain that learned to be vigilant in the night can learn something else. The direction is clear, even when the timeline is slow. How a person frames their insomnia, the belief they hold about what it means, predicts treatment outcomes independently of symptom severity. Research from Laura Palagini at the University of Pisa documents that people who frame insomnia as evidence of something fundamentally broken about themselves show worse outcomes in CBT-I than those who frame it as a learned pattern. That can change. This is not a finding about optimism. It is a finding about belief architecture. When the problem is understood to be who you are, changes feel futile before they begin, because you cannot revise something fixed. The first move towards sleep, in this model, is not a sleep behavior. It is a belief revision about what kind of problem this is. The body's internal clock, a cluster of cells in the brain that runs on an approximately 24-hour cycle, operates independently of cognitive state. But cognitive arousal can compete with the body's homeostatic sleep pressure, delaying the expression of biological sleepiness. In plain terms, the body gets tired on schedule, but a mind engaged in belief evaluation can override that signal, not indefinitely, but long enough to shift sleep timing. Sleepiness arrives and is missed because something more pressing is happening in the mind. By the time the mental activity subsides, the biological window has partially closed. The clock keeps running. The mind was somewhere else when the door opened. Research on sleep in couples has consistently shown that relationship quality, specifically the felt belief that one's partner is reliably supportive, predicts sleep quality independent of other psychosocial factors. Conversely, relational uncertainty, the low-level belief that a relationship is unstable or one standing within it is unclear, is associated with elevated nighttime cortisol and reduced slow-wave sleep. A nervous system that genuinely believes its primary attachment relationship is secure can lower its social threat monitoring at night. One that doesn't continues to watch. The most ancient sleep aid the human organism has available is not a drug. It is the felt sense, carried into the dark, that someone is reliably there. Reframing a stressful situation, not replacing a negative belief with a positive one, but adding context that changes its emotional significance, has a measurable effect on sleep architecture when practiced before bed. Research from Stanford's Psychophysiology Laboratory shows that pre-sleep reappraisal reduces amygdala reactivity, lowers cortisol, and shortens sleep onset latency compared to suppression or rehearsal. The belief this is uncertain remains. The added frame uncertainty has preceded growth before changes its neurochemical footprint. The belief doesn't have to become untrue to become less alarming. It needs only to become less final, to lose the quality of a verdict and become, instead, a sentence that is still being written. You've been listening for a while now, thoughts still flickering like candlelight. Just notice. Don't judge. Just notice where your mind is. We're exploring the very beliefs that have been running quietly beneath everything. The same things that were thinking you, while you were thinking about other things. Strange, beautiful, and becoming very calm. Let's drift onward together. Gratitude. The belief that one's current situation contains genuinely positive elements, has a documented sleep benefit not explained by positive mood alone. Research from Robert Emmons at UC Davis and subsequent sleep-focused studies show that gratitude practice before bed reduces pre-sleep cognitive arousal and increases sleep duration. When this belief activates, a region of the prefrontal cortex associated with value assignment and emotional regulation increases activity, while amygdala reactivity decreases. A mind that holds, at the moment, before sleep, the genuine belief that something in its life is worthwhile, is a mind with less open threat monitoring to maintain. The question of whether things are good enough has, for this moment, a quiet answer. Confronting the fundamental uncertainties of existence, mortality, freedom, meaning, isolation, generates a specific type of cognitive arousal at bedtime that existential psychology has studied for decades. Research in terror management theory documents that when awareness of mortality is activated, bedtime rumination increases, particularly in people who lack what researchers call symbolic immortality buffers, beliefs or commitments that give life meaning beyond the individual lifespan. People who carry a genuine sense that their life matters, that what they do leaves something behind, show less existential arousal at night. Meaning, in this framework, is not philosophical luxury. It is a neurological regulator of the quiet hours, and the body responds to its presence or absence. CBTI, sleep restriction therapy, one of the most effective components of the treatment protocol, works primarily by disrupting the belief that extended time in bed equals more sleep. Patients limit time in bed to their actual sleep time, creating short-term sleep deprivation that consolidates subsequent sleep. But the mechanism is as much cognitive as physiological. The sleep-restricted individual is forced to disconfirm the belief that lying awake in bed is useful, or even acceptable. The bed becomes reassociated with sleep rather than with anxious wakefulness. The belief changes first. The body follows. This sequence, belief revision, preceding behavioral change, is more common in sleep medicine than most people realize. Beliefs about control. Specifically, whether a person believes they have meaningful agency over important outcomes in their life, predict sleep quality across cultures and age groups. Research applying locus of control frameworks to sleep consistently shows that people who believe their actions meaningfully shape outcomes sleep better than those who believe outcomes are primarily determined by forces outside themselves. The body responds to that belief the way it responds to any signal about the futility of effort. It enters a state of passive, unresolvable alertness. If effort doesn't matter, the monitoring becomes purposeless but doesn't stop. A belief in one's own agency, by contrast, signals that the watch can stand down. The outcome is in capable hands. Even neutral attention directed toward the self, counting heartbeats, monitoring, breathing, is more arousing than attention directed outward. Research by Alison Harvey at UC Berkeley has documented this. Self-focused attention generates physiological arousal independent of the content of what is being noticed. The clinical implication is counterintuitive. The instruction to relax by focusing on the body may be counterproductive for people with high self-monitoring tendencies, because attention to the self is itself stimulating. What the research suggests is not inward scrutiny, but outward gentleness. The ambient sounds of the room, the temperature of the air, the simple fact of the dark. The direction away from self-monitoring, not toward it, is where rest lives. Traumatic experience revises core beliefs about safety and predictability, and those revised beliefs are among the most potent sleep disruptors in clinical literature. Research from trauma and PTSD programs shows that sleep maintenance, insomnia, and nightmare disorder are among the most persistent post-traumatic symptoms, mediated specifically by hypervigilance beliefs rather than by traumatic memory reactivation alone. The sleep disruption in trauma is not primarily about having difficult memories. It is about having updated one's operating assumptions about the world, that it is permanently unsafe, that one's own perceptions cannot be trusted, in ways the nervous system continues to act on, long after the original event has passed. The belief updates. The body follows. The night keeps the account. The ability to hold beliefs loosely, to recognize that a strongly held conviction might benefit from another angle, another reading, another frame, predicts insomnia outcomes better than belief content alone. Research on cognitive flexibility shows that people who are more resistant to updating their beliefs show worse outcomes in sleep-focused treatment, not because their beliefs are more distorted, but because they are more defended. Beliefs held rigidly generate more arousal than beliefs held with appropriate openness, not because the content is worse, but because rigidity itself is a form of effort. The mind that can hold its certainties lightly has already begun, in some important sense, to soften towards sleep. Writing about distressing beliefs and experiences, structured expressive writing, even for short periods, has a documented positive effect on sleep. James Pennebaker's expressive writing research, accumulated across many studies, shows that this practice reduces ruminative thought, lowers pre-sleep cognitive arousal, and improves both how quickly sleep comes and how long it lasts. The proposed mechanism involves language itself. Putting an experience into words activates regions of the prefrontal cortex that inhibit the amygdala's emotional output. Labeling the belief, writing it, naming it, reduces its charge. The act of articulation changes the neurological status of what was being held. Writing it down makes it slightly less urgent than keeping it inside. What a culture teaches people to believe about sleep shapes the experience of sleep, independently of biology. Cross-cultural research shows that cultures with permissive beliefs about sleep variability, where waking in the night is considered normal rather than alarming, report significantly less subjective insomnia than cultures with rigid beliefs about consolidated sleep. The objective sleep does not differ much. The belief about what the objective sleep means differs enormously. In Japan, a concept called inemuri, brief, acceptable public dozing, is associated with lower reported sleep distress despite comparable or shorter actual sleep times. The story told about sleep is part of what sleep becomes. The night obeys the beliefs brought into it. 50 facts in, the pattern has sharpened into something specific. These facts have traced belief from its cognitive architecture through its neurological expression, from its cultural embedding through its physiological weight. What has emerged is a documentation of a mechanism. The mind does not lie awake because of what is happening in the night. It lies awake because of what it decided beforehand, about itself, about others, about the future. Those decisions, once made, are not content to rest. The second half of tonight follows what begins to shift when those decisions are no longer being continuously re-verified. When the first opening appears towards something the mind has been circling from the outside. That opening is where we go next. What just opened? The question of what happens when the mind stops needing to re-verify what it has decided is not only a cognitive science question. You may be carrying a version of that re-verification right now. A belief you have checked enough times tonight. That the checking has become its own event. This isn't a failure of the night. It is the thing the second half follows. Notice the quality of your breath in this moment. Not the depth of it, the texture. Whether it is held slightly or whether it is moving freely. The second half of tonight is about what becomes available. When the checking softens, just by degrees. Now we continue. When the mind can shift from self-evaluation to simply being present, noticing the sounds in the room, the weight of the body, the temperature of the air, sleep onset becomes measurably faster. Research from cognitive science shows this ability varies significantly across people and is trainable. The shift from what do I believe about myself to what is actually happening in my body right now is not distraction. It is a change in cognitive register, from the self as subject under examination to the self as a body already at rest. The brain uses that shift as an entry point to sleep. Not a technique. A permission to stop being the thing that needs evaluating. Whether a person believes they have enough time, whether the current moment feels safe to inhabit, whether the future seems manageable, operates as a constant low-level input to the sleep system. Research applying time perspective theory has found that a future-oriented outlook dominated by threat and uncertainty is among the stronger predictors of sleep difficulty within that framework. The future orientation doesn't require active worry to disrupt sleep. The background belief that the future is a site of danger maintains the vigilance system in passive readiness that competes with sleep onset, even in the absence of any specific thing being worried about. The threat has no content. It is simply present, waiting to be confirmed. The balance between the body's two nervous system modes, one for mobilization, one for restoration, is directly readable in the tiny variations between heartbeats, a measure called heart rate variability. People who carry chronic negative beliefs about their own adequacy and relational safety show measurably reduced heart rate variability, indicating the body is more ready for action than for rest. The deep sleep the body needs cannot occur robustly in a physiological environment organized around the belief that vigilance is necessary. The pathway from belief to body state to sleep quality is not abstract. It is written in the rhythm of the heart, night after night, in the same direction. Deliberately reimagining a distressing memory or anticipated event, giving it a different ending, placing it in a different context, has been shown to reduce nightmare frequency and improve sleep in people with high dream-related distress. Research on imagery rehearsal therapy documents that the repeated mental rehearsal of a revised version of a distressing event changes the content of subsequent dreams, suggesting that belief updating during wakefulness carries into the sleeping brain's narrative processing. The mind can write a different version of what happened, and the sleeping brain will, over time, begin to tell that version instead. The story doesn't have to be final just because it was first. The grogginess experienced upon waking, sleep inertia, is intensified by negative beliefs about the night's adequacy. Research on post-sleep cognition shows that people who wake believing they did not sleep well experience more severe and prolonged impairment than those who wake with neutral assessments. Even when objective sleep data shows comparable architecture, the belief creates its own physiology. The expectation of impairment activates stress responses that slow cognitive recovery, generating the very impairment that was anticipated. The morning after a difficult night is made harder by the story told about the night, not just the night itself. The verdict arrives before the evidence is fully counted. Hope, the belief that desired outcomes are achievable through one's own actions, shows direct positive effects on sleep. Research using validated hope scales documents that people with higher hope show lower pre-sleep arousal, shorter sleep onset latency, and higher sleep quality ratings. Neurologically, hope occupies a middle regulation state. Not the passive drift of helplessness, not the high activation vigilance of acute threat. It is alert without being alarmed, confident without being activated. That state turns out to be compatible with sleep in a way that both its absence and its anxious opposite are not. The nervous system can rest when it believes that effort, tomorrow, will matter. The sharp cortisol rise in the first 30 to 45 minutes after waking is calibrated partly by what the brain believes about the coming day. People who anticipate a threatening or evaluation-laden day show a more pronounced cortisol awakening response than those who anticipate a manageable one. More relevantly, this calibration begins not at waking, but during the final hours of sleep, as the brain prepares for consciousness. A mind carrying the belief that tomorrow is dangerous begins physiologically preparing for danger while still technically asleep. The morning doesn't intrude on the night from the outside. It intrudes from within, from the belief the night has been carrying all along. Carrying chronic resentment, the ongoing belief that a wrong done to oneself remains unresolved and still constitutes a present threat, activates the same threat monitoring systems as contemporary social danger, with measurable effects on nighttime cortisol and sleep fragmentation. Research on forgiveness as a psychological process documents that releasing resentment, revising the belief about the harm from present threat to past event, is associated with physiological changes consistent with reduced vigilance. The body is not wrong to respond to the belief that a threat is ongoing. It is responding correctly to what the belief is saying. Revising the belief is not weakness. It is also the thing that allows the body to stand down. Social jet lag. The misalignment between the body's biological clock and the sleep schedule imposed by social obligations is worsened by beliefs about productivity, worth, and the moral meaning of rest. Research by Till Roenberg at Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, who developed this concept, notes that individuals with the strongest beliefs that rest must be earned, that productivity measures value, and that sleeping late reflects poor character, show the most severe social jet lag effects. The body needs a later schedule. The belief overrides the signal. The biology pays the accumulated cost of the argument. Not in the moment the belief is held, but in the quality of sleep that follows. Whether a person can genuinely disengage from work-related beliefs and concerns during non-work time predicts sleep quality more strongly than the actual amount of work done, hours logged, or objective stressfulness of the environment. Research by Sabine Sonnentag at the University of Mannheim has consistently documented this over more than a decade of occupational health studies. The disruption to sleep comes not from how much is done, but from the inability to update the belief that work is still happening, that the demand is still active, the evaluation still in progress. The belief that it is allowed to stop is what allows sleep to begin. The work ends when the mind agrees it has ended. Loneliness, defined not as the absence of people but as the presence of the belief that one is poorly understood or poorly connected, has consistent and demonstrable effects on sleep. Research from the University of Chicago's Social Neuroscience program documents that lonely individuals show more fragmented sleep, more nighttime micro-arousals, and reduced slow-wave sleep than socially connected individuals matched for objective social contact. The mechanism is the social threat signal. A brain that believes itself isolated activates ancient vigilance, systems evolved for environments where isolation was genuinely dangerous. The body monitors a perimeter the belief established. It does not know that the danger it is watching for has changed form. Acceptance of mortality, genuinely incorporating the inevitability of death into one's belief system rather than suppressing awareness of it, predicts nighttime existential rumination and sleep quality, particularly in older populations. Research combining existential psychology and gerontological sleep studies shows that older adults who have arrived at what Erik Erikson called ego integrity, a genuine belief that the life lived has been meaningful and sufficient, show significantly less bedtime existential arousal than those carrying unresolved conflicts about their life's value. The work of meaning-making, this research suggests, is also the work of being able to sleep through the night in later years. It is never purely philosophical. The body keeps the score of the unanswered questions. Being genuinely heard by another person, not just listened to, but understood and accepted, reduces pre-sleep arousal through mechanisms distinct from the cognitive benefits of journaling alone. The interpersonal element adds something specific. The belief that one has been seen and not found wanting, which signals to the social monitoring system that the evaluation has already occurred and the verdict was acceptable. That signal, "I was understood today," contributes to sleep not through its content, but through its relational meaning. The social monitoring apparatus can reduce its vigilance because it has received what it was watching for. The night becomes a little quieter for having been seen. The beliefs most resistant to change are often those formed earliest, in the first decade of life, when the developing brain had less capacity to contextualize them. These early beliefs about safety, worth, and the reliability of others are encoded with a procedural quality. They run automatically, shaping experience before the person has a chance to consciously evaluate them. Research applying developmental psychology to sleep has found that adverse childhood experiences predict adult sleep difficulty through these early belief formations, rather than through traumatic memory reactivation per se. The beliefs learned in childhood continue to set the conditions of the night, decades later, not because they are permanent, but because they have had the most practice. Evidence for belief-mediated sleep disruption exists at the level of gene expression. Research has documented that early adverse experiences, which shape core beliefs about safety and self-worth, alter the way stress response genes are expressed, producing enduring changes in how the body's alarm system is calibrated. These changes operate through the same arousal pathways that belief content activates. This discovery matters because it closes the remaining distance between psychology and biology. The beliefs carried by the body are not only mental events, they have left marks in the chemistry and, ultimately, in the systems that regulate sleep. The story and the cells have been in conversation all along. The overlap between grief and insomnia is not coincidental. It is mechanistic. Research on complicated grief, led by Catherine Shear at Columbia University, documents that unresolved grief involves a specific belief disruption. The inability to revise the model of the world that included the lost person. Core beliefs about safety, connection, and future possibility were organized around a reality that no longer exists. The grieving mind, at night, still runs simulations based on the old map, finding the person there, expecting their presence, encountering absence. Sleep becomes possible again, the evidence shows. Not when the person is forgotten, but when the belief map is gradually, painfully revised to reflect the territory as it now is. The capacity to find events simultaneously distressing and absurd, the cognitive flexibility required for adaptive humor, is associated with lower pre-sleep rumination and better sleep quality. Research on humor as a coping mechanism shows that this capacity represents a specific form of belief revision. The frame of evaluation shifts from "this is a problem that demands resolution" to "this is a situation that also contains absurdity." The latter frame is neurochemically less activating than the former. The capacity to hold one's own narrative without complete seriousness, not dismissing the difficulty, but refusing to grant it total authority, is, among other things, a physiological resource that sleep can use. Flow states, complete absorption in a challenging activity, where the sense of self temporarily dissolves into the doing, are followed by sleep of measurably different quality than arousal states. Research on recovery after flow experiences suggests the nervous system is left in a distinctive condition: tired, satisfied, with reduced rumination and enhanced readiness for sleep. The belief most associated with flow is what Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called autotelic experience, that the activity has value in itself, independent of external evaluation. When that belief extends to the night itself, that rest is worthwhile regardless of what tomorrow holds, it creates a physiological state compatible with sleep. The night has value even if the morning does not confirm it. Meta-worry, the belief that having worried thoughts is itself a problem indicating something is wrong with the mind, predicts insomnia severity more robustly than the content of the original worries. Where flow states dissolve the self into the present, meta-worry doubles it. There is the original concern, and then there is the anxious watcher observing the concern and judging it unacceptable. The metacognitive model of insomnia, developed by Adrian Wells at the University of Manchester, identifies both positive beliefs about worry and negative beliefs about it as drivers of the insomnia cycle. Neither the content of what is worried about nor the frequency of worrying predicts insomnia as reliably as the belief about what worrying means. The relationship between spiritual or religious beliefs and sleep quality is among the most consistently replicated findings in the psychology of sleep. Harold Koenig at Duke University has reviewed hundreds of studies on this relationship, finding that spiritual practice and belief across traditions is associated with better sleep quality in the majority of well-controlled studies. The most consistent proposed mechanism is the belief content itself, that the self is held by something larger than circumstance, that uncertainty about the future exists within a larger order, that the present night is safe regardless of what tomorrow holds. A mind that genuinely carries those beliefs has substantially less open monitoring to maintain through the night. Beliefs about fairness, whether the world is fundamentally just and suffering ultimately meaningful, show a complex relationship with sleep. Research applying just world theory to sleep contexts has found that people with very high beliefs in a just world sleep better on average, but show more severe disruption after experiences of injustice, because the event demands a significant belief revision. People with moderate, flexible beliefs about meaning, who hold the sense without requiring it to be perfectly consistent, show more resilient sleep across variable circumstances. A belief that meaning exists is useful for sleep. A belief that meaning is guaranteed becomes fragile at the first exception. The useful version holds possibility. The brittle version holds demands. Beliefs about aging, specifically, the degree to which a person has absorbed negative cultural stereotypes about cognitive decline and deterioration, have direct effects on the sleep of older adults through stereotype threat mechanisms. Research from longitudinal aging studies documents that older adults who hold more positive beliefs about aging sleep better, show less nighttime cortisol, and experience fewer nocturnal awakenings than those holding more negative beliefs, independent of objective health status. What you believe about your own aging is what your nervous system acts on through the night. The belief activates a vigilance orientation toward the body, monitoring for evidence of decline. The more neutrally held belief does not generate that vigilance, and the body is left to rest. Surrender, the willingness to hold something as unresolved without requiring its resolution tonight, corresponds to a specific belief revision. Releasing the conviction that continued cognitive effort will produce the answer. Research on acceptance-based approaches documents that genuine acceptance, distinct from resignation or defeat, activates decreased sympathetic tone, decreased cortisol, and increased vagal activity. The belief "I can let this remain open for now" is not the same as "I give up." It is the recognition that the resolution, if it comes, will not come through effort in this bed at this hour. That recognition, when genuinely held rather than performed, is one of the most reliable pathways to sleep the evidence supports. The question can rest even when it hasn't been answered. Whether people hold accurate beliefs about what actually affects sleep matters independently of what they do. People who understand that consistent sleep timing matters more than total hours, that lying awake in bed reinforces wakefulness, and that nighttime awakenings are a normal feature of all adult sleep, sleep better than people who practice the same behaviors without that understanding. The belief provides the context that makes the behavior effective. The same recommendation fails in one person and works in another because the behavior is the same, but the meaning assigned to it differs. Understanding, not just compliance, is load-bearing in the structure of sleep. The belief about what is happening shapes what is happening. Tonight began with a question. Why is what you believe about life the biggest barrier keeping you from sleep? The answer has arrived in layers. Core beliefs activate threat surveillance. Surveillance keeps the prefrontal cortex online. The online prefrontal cortex delays the deactivation that sleep requires. The beliefs about safety, worth, certainty, connection, and meaning are not obstacles placed between you and sleep by circumstance. They are the operating conditions of the watchful mind. The remaining facts carry a different quality. They are not more evidence. They are the mechanism beginning to soften, in real time, as the watch grows less urgent and the night reveals what it has always been. The place the body already knows the way to. You might be feeling tired now. That's exactly where this was always going. Breathe slowly. Feel the small cycles of your own body, the rise and fall, the tightening and release, the rhythm that has never required your permission to continue. The beliefs you came in with tonight are still there. They haven't been argued away, but they have been, perhaps, slightly less urgent, not because they were wrong, but because the mind has been moving through them, and the body has been moving towards something quieter. Let everything unfold in its own order. The watch has been keeping time. And the time it has been keeping, without announcement, has been this one. We're almost there now. The brain at rest is not an idle brain. Slow wave sleep, the deepest and most physically restorative phase, is characterized by the synchronized oscillation of cortical neurons in slow, sweeping waves. A system called the glymphatic network, primarily studied in animal models with emerging human evidence, appears to clear metabolic waste from the brain most efficiently during this phase, expanding the spaces between cells to allow cerebrospinal fluid to wash through. The brain is doing its most essential repair. The beliefs can wait. The tissue does not. REM sleep, where the most vivid dreaming occurs, is the phase in which the brain processes emotional experience. Norepinephrine, the neurochemical most associated with threat response and belief-activated vigilance, drops to its lowest level of the entire day during REM. The brain reviews what happened, in a bath of chemistry that makes it safer to look at. The beliefs that felt most final are revisited in a different medium. Something shifts. Not solved, not dismissed, but touched differently than it was before. The hippocampus replays the day's experiences during sleep at a speed several times faster than they originally occurred. Emotional charge is gradually separated from factual content through this process. A belief encountered with fear yesterday is slightly less charged after one night's sleep. Not resolved, less charged. Sleep does not solve beliefs. It metabolizes them, incrementally, over many nights. The work is quiet and cumulative, and it has been underway since the moment you lay down. Heart rate variability, the small, healthy variations in the timing between heartbeats, increases during deep sleep. This reflects parasympathetic dominance. The body is in a state of genuine restoration. The same heart rhythm suppressed by chronic negative beliefs during waking is rebuilt, hour by hour, through the night. The body knows the direction. It has always been moving toward recovery. The beliefs are the friction encountered on the way, not the destination. Sleep and immune function are interdependent in ways that extend to belief. Research from Carnegie Mellon documents that people with higher scores on meaning and purpose in life, a belief-based variable, show stronger immune responses and recover from experimental challenges more rapidly, mediated through sleep quality. Believing your life matters helps your body repair itself. The biology does not separate the story a person carries from the cells that carry it. The meaning and the tissue are in the same body. The brain's electrical activity during deep sleep generates a state of neural plasticity unlike waking. Synaptic connections built under the influence of fear-driven beliefs are quietly weakened during this phase, the brain trimming back the architecture of vigilance that accumulated across the day. Each night makes something slightly easier to set down. not through effort, through the slow intelligence of sleep, doing what it has always done, without needing to be asked. The parasympathetic nervous system, the branch responsible for rest, digestion, and recovery, becomes more active as sleep deepens. Its increased activity is associated with reduced inflammatory signaling, decreased sympathetic tone, and the physical sensation of settling into safety. The same nerve pathways the body uses to signal the threat has passed. Rest is safe, are the pathways most active when sleep is deepest. The body has its own language for rest. It has been speaking it every night, whether or not the beliefs allowed it to be heard. Melatonin, the hormone that initiates sleep onset, is suppressed by the cortisol elevation that belief-driven hyperarousal produces. When beliefs generate the sense of threat, cortisol rise, and that rise directly inhibits melatonin secretion from the pineal gland. The belief shapes the chemistry. The chemistry holds the signal back. The body waits for the signal the chemistry is blocking. Upstream of the waiting is the belief. Sleep begins when the chain is allowed to complete itself. The thalamus, the brain's sensory relay station, enters a gating state during sleep onset, in which it stops forwarding sensory information to the cortex. The world goes quiet not because it becomes quiet, but because the brain stops reporting it. The same gating applies to internally generated signals. As the thalamus dials down, the urgency of unresolved beliefs loses its amplification. The beliefs are still there, but they are no longer being broadcast at full volume. The gate has begun to close, and the closing is not something you have to do. Research on dream content across the night shows a consistent pattern. Earlier dreams contain more emotionally charged material, often directly related to waking concerns. Later, dreams become more abstract, more spatially unusual, more narratively open. The brain moves from processing the most urgent material towards something more exploratory. The beliefs that structured the early hours of sleep loosen their grip as the night progresses. By the final sleep cycle, the mind has moved somewhere the beliefs cannot quite follow. Something has been metabolized. Something has been set down, even temporarily, and temporarily is enough. The sensation of finally drifting off, that unmistakable dissolving of the boundary between wakefulness and sleep, corresponds to a measurable event. The activation of neurons in the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, which actively inhibit the arousal systems. Sleep does not arrive passively. It is produced by a dedicated biological system that has been building toward this moment since the day began. The body was always working toward this. The beliefs were the weather it moved through. The destination was never in question. Adenosine, the sleep pressure molecule that accumulates throughout every waking hour, builds regardless of belief content. It doesn't care whether the mind is troubled or at peace. It accumulates its case independently, hour by hour, and is metabolized during sleep regardless of how the night proceeded. This biological certainty runs beneath everything else in tonight's story. The body's need to sleep is not contingent on the beliefs being resolved. It is patient and persist. It does not need permission. It only needs an opening, and openings arrive. During REM sleep, the motor cortex is temporarily paralyzed, preventing the body from acting out its dreams. Less widely known is that this relaxation extends to the muscular architecture of emotional holding. The jaw softens, the brow smooths, the shoulders release, the diaphragm deepens and slows. The body moves, during sleep, into postures of release that it rarely finds while awake. Whatever the beliefs are carrying through the day, the body puts it down at night. Not permanently, but genuinely, for hours. That is enough to make a difference. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for belief evaluation and self-monitoring, does not simply switch off during sleep. It releases its grip in gradual stages, each corresponding to a measurable brain state. Alpha, a softening of focused attention. Theta, a loosening of deliberate thought. Delta, the suspension of deliberate processing itself. Tonight has been moving through each of these stages in the background, while the facts unfolded. The journey from watchfulness to sleep is measured in degrees of release. Each degree has already been taken. Sleep architecture follows a predictable pattern. Early cycles are dominated by deep, physically restorative sleep. Later cycles contain progressively more REM. The body repairs tissue, consolidates immunity, and clears metabolic waste first, before it returns to the emotional processing that REM provides. Whatever beliefs drove the body into the night, the body attends to its most urgent physical needs without waiting for the narrative to resolve. It knows what comes first. The physical repair is already underway. The emotional work follows, patient and unhurried, in the hours that remain. The sounds that surround sleep are not indifferent to what the body is doing. Research by Orphew Buxton and colleagues has documented that auditory signals associated with social safety, a familiar voice, soft breathing nearby, the ambient sounds of a known environment, actively reduce cortisol and deepen sleep. The nervous system continues monitoring the acoustic environment during sleep, and what it hears shapes what it allows itself to feel. A quiet room does not merely permit rest. When the associations are right, the quiet itself becomes confirmation that this place, this night, is safe. The dreaming brain does not evaluate beliefs the way the waking brain does. During REM sleep, the region of the prefrontal cortex, most responsible for logical evaluation and belief testing, shows reduced activity, while limbic and visual systems increase theirs. Dreams are experienced without the critical apparatus that would normally assess whether they are accurate. The impossible feels credible. The fearsome becomes strange, sometimes even absurd. Something in the sleeping mind already knows that most of what felt urgent during the day is, from a different vantage, a story, and stories can be revised. The clearance system that operates during sleep removes not only metabolic waste, but also excess excitatory neurotransmitters from the synaptic space. The chemistry of cognitive activation that accumulates through a day of belief evaluation and self-monitoring. This process, studied primarily in animal models with ongoing human research, suggests that sleep is literally washing away some of what made the beliefs feel so charged. The chemistry of urgency is being diluted. The night is already working on what the mind could not quiet by effort alone. The work is chemical. The benefit is felt as peace. Body temperature drops naturally in the hour before sleep, a biological signal that anticipates melatonin release and predicts sleep onset. The hands and feet warm as blood redistributes from the core to the periphery, beginning the thermal regulation associated with deep sleep. This cooling is one of the body's clearest signals that something is ending. The vigilance, the holding, the ongoing assessment of whether everything is all right. The temperature has been dropping since before you lay down. The body has been preparing for this without being asked. It was always going this way. Brief bursts of brain activity during NREM sleep, called sleep spindles, gate incoming sensory signals, protecting sleep continuity against disruption. Research from Jan Born at the University of Tübingen has linked these spindles to offline consolidation of learning, the brain quietly organizing what it encountered during the day into what it now knows. Whatever this night has offered, a different way of holding a belief, a loosened certainty, a moment of permission, is being worked into the architecture. The sleeping brain is not waiting. It is integrating. Quietly. Without announcement. Already. The body at rest generates a distinct brain state. Slow oscillations, moving in coherent waves across wide regions of cortex. The entire brain briefly synchronized into a single rhythm. That synchrony does not occur in waking. It requires the fragmentation of competing demands to stop. For a moment, everything moves together. The evaluating and the experiencing, the watching and the watched, the belief and the one who holds it, all at the same pace. Rest is not the absence of the mind. It is the mind, for once, undivided. After a full night of sleep, beliefs that felt urgent and immovable at bedtime are typically rated as less intense, less final, and more open to revision. This is not rationalization or forgetting. It is the neurological consequence of overnight emotional processing, the sleeping brain having worked on the charge without the waking brain's permission or awareness. The belief has not changed. Its weight has been reduced. Sleep does not solve the problem. It changes the relationship to the problem. And sometimes, often, a changed relationship is all that was needed for the morning to feel like somewhere worth arriving. The transition into deep sleep corresponds to increasing coherence of neural activity across both hemispheres. the two sides of the brain moving in the same direction at once. This bilateral coherence is associated with reduced anxiety, reduced self-referential processing, and the quality most people describe as the moment sleep finally came. The evaluating side and the experiencing side stop diverging. The belief and the believer move together. At rest, briefly, mercifully, as one. The final sleep cycle, dominated by extended REM, is where the brain engages most fully with emotional memory and the subtle revision of how experiences are understood. Research from Rosalind Cartwright's Dream Laboratory documented that in people processing difficult life events, the same material appears in dreams of decreasing emotional intensity over successive nights, the brain working it through, returning to it softer each time. Sleep does not ignore the beliefs that filled the night. It attends to them, quietly and consistently, in the hours when the watcher is finally, genuinely, asleep. The answer to why what you believe about life is the biggest barrier keeping you from sleep is not a scientific conclusion. It is something closer to a recognition. The mind cannot rest while it is still deciding whether it is safe, sufficient, and understood. Every arousal system, every vigilance pathway, every chemical cascade traced through tonight's facts leads back to that one unspoken question, not asked in words, but carried in the body, set as the condition for everything else. Sleep does not withhold itself as punishment for the beliefs you hold. It waits for the moment, this one, or some future version of it, when the question is allowed to rest before it has been answered. Tonight began with the question of why beliefs keep the night awake. It ends having traced the answer through the amygdala's alarm, the prefrontal cortex's reluctance to step down, and the glymphatic system's quiet work proceeding regardless. What started as a question about barriers became an answer about loyalty, the mind watching over what it loves, not yet knowing the watch could rest. The night was never the problem. The watching was. And tonight, the watching has had permission to soften. Core beliefs are chewed over most at night because the mind is faithful to what it carries. What you take from tonight is not a solution. It is a recognition that the beliefs were never the enemy of sleep. They were the reason sleep was kept so carefully. Now they are being held a little more lightly. If tonight brought a moment, even a small one, where the watch felt less necessary, a gentle like or subscribe helps another mind carrying the same beliefs find their way to this quiet. One quiet tap, one sleepy soul at a time. Right now, the beliefs are still there, but the chemistry that made them urgent has been falling toward its floor for the past hour. Not because you resolved anything, because you let the night do what the night does. Let your entire being dissolve into that process. The lowering, the releasing, the return to baseline that your nervous system has been carrying out. Without announcement, without conditions. without needing to know that you were all right first. It already decided you were. You can allow these thoughts to settle now, like a frequency that has finally moved out of range. Not gone. Just no longer requiring reception. Let your body grow still with the work already underway. Sleep carries you into the part of the night where the beliefs stop speaking and the body speaks instead, in temperature and rhythm and the slow, sweeping waves that mean it is safe to go. The Psychology for Sleep playlist has spent many hours in this territory, the space between what the mind decides and what the body already knows. The next hour follows the part of tonight's question that this one didn't have time to finish. That hour is waiting whenever you are ready. But if your eyes are closed, stay there. Rest well, quiet one. The beliefs don't need answers tonight. The night has already begun its work, where science becomes the softest place to rest. Good night.